Awesome. Well, hey, Jordan, thanks for being on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
So as a way of getting started, can you just give us a quick introduction?
Absolutely. So Jordan Morrow, I'm the global head of data literacy for Click. Just means I'm a giant nerd and love being a nerd. I've been a nerd for a very long time. I love mathematics and statistics and what data and analytics can do. So I've been on this journey for a while with Click for just about 3 years, creating the world of data literacy and then bringing it to the world.
Great. And what does data literacy mean?
Yeah, so data literacy, if you think about the world that we live in now, the digital and data economies that are existing, data literacy truly means the ability to read, work with, analyze, and argue with data. And so if you think about the world of analytics and data that we live in, we hear a lot of things around the term data scientist. We hear a lot of things around the word big data, algorithms, all these fancy things. But the reality is the majority of organizations, the majority of people in the world do not have skills in those areas, nor do they need the ability in those areas. And so data literacy makes up the majority of that work, where individuals just need an ability to consume data effectively versus becoming a data scientist.
So one thing that I really want to get out of the podcast today, and I think the listeners will really want to get out of the podcast, is how do you go from being maybe a laggard to accelerate that journey? Because I think we can both agree if a company is not using advanced analytics in the next 5 or 10 years, like they're probably not going to be around to tell the story.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So this brings up a good question overall. When you think about any sort of business intelligence tool, and I'll throw Excel in that bucket. It's not a full-scale business intelligence tool like a Click or a Tableau or a Power BI. But the reality is we're living in this economy in this world now where everybody is getting access to data, right? They're getting data democratized to them. But at the same time as this data is getting democratized to them, they don't have a comfort level to use it effectively, like you just said. And the reason for that is they don't go to school for it. The majority of people are not going to school for computer science, data science, mathematics, statistics, and so forth. But we're living in an era, like you just said, that if organizations are not good at analytics in the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to get bypassed by all the organizations that are. So what can an individual or organization do? The reality is there has to be a paradigm shift. And I choose that word very carefully. We're shifting away from the old way of doing things into a new way of doing things. I think sometimes people are fearful that with data and analytics, they're going to have to add to their current job, right? Everybody has busy jobs. I don't think I've ever met a person who said their job was not busy. And so we can't just sit here and say, here's new mandatory work for you to take on. That's not going to fly. What we need to start saying is there's a paradigm shift that has occurred in the world where it's no longer a nice to have to be good at analytics, but it's an imperative. And to get better at it, I am a big believer that the human element has to remain involved within the data and analytical workings. And that means I'm totally a big believer in investing in AI. Look at the products that Big Squid has and the Kraken, predictive modeling and all that. Those things are mandatory. What we need is those who can use the human side of things to interpret it, to bring it to light, to use their curiosity and creativity. So when people ask me, how do I get started in this? We need to think of that definition, the ability to read, work with, analyze, and argue with data. Those 4 characteristics need to be illuminated in a different light than data science. Reading data does not mean you have to read a complex algorithm or code in Python or SQL. You don't need to look at some massive statistical test. It becomes utilizing a tool like Excel or a BI tool and being able to read the information, getting beyond an observation, truly getting to insights. That's one of my favorite ways to say it is we need organizations and people to get comfortable not just seeing that the trends in the chart go up. They need to get comfortable about why did they go up. And this is where curiosity plays a part. So I call them the 2 C's of data literacy: curiosity and creativity. Become curious. Ask people why. I have 5 kids. Kids are curious, right? And sometimes I won't lie, you get very annoyed with your children because they won't stop asking you questions. But for some odd reason, as we become adults, we stop asking questions. We stop being curious. And this really hits home in the data and analytical world because we keep hearing that machines are going to do it all for us. And they're not. We can't lose the human side of it. We need to use curiosity to ask all these questions about the data and information. And then we need to get creative at storytelling and things like that to pull it out. And of course, I have books and books galore and all these other things people can do, but I always tell them, just start asking questions. If you start asking questions, you will naturally get better at insight, not just an observation. And then as you ask questions, you can find the books, the papers, the documents, all those things that can train you to get better at those 4 characteristics of data literacy.
And I love what you were saying there. And one thing that I've been thinking a lot of recently is data is really just a numerical representation of someone's business. That's really all it is. I want your feedback on this. And I'm guessing you probably had the same experiences. When we're going to a CFO, a CEO, whatever, we can't be pitching analytics or data. It's like, what are your customers doing? Which one of your customers are going to leave? Which one of your customers can you cross-sell, upsell? Like that, those are the types of conversations I think really get people interested in data, as opposed to leading with, hey, we're going to do machine learning. There are some C-level executives that are like, oh, machine learning is really cool, but like the vast majority of them like don't really care. And so I just wanted to get like your feedback and your take on your end.
Yeah, that's spot on. The reality is, and that goes to the curiosity piece of it, right? What's happening with customers, this and that. I'm going to come at this at 2 different approaches. The first approach is most organizations for years, they hear about all those catchy terms like you just mentioned, machine learning and all this stuff. And so they invest in software, thinking the software will be the silver bullet. It's never going to be the silver bullet. The silver bullet doesn't exist out there. So what ends up happening is they invest in the software thinking that's going to get them insight to make decisions. It's not going to. And so what ends up happening is the software is perfectly fine. But they start to blame the software that they didn't get the answer from it. When in reality, the software was great. It was the people who were not prepared for it. And so you can't just go in and say, let me give you software. But that's the route that historically people used to do. They would just go in and say, here's our software, versus tell me about your clientele. Tell me about the business questions you were trying to answer. Because in our day and age, there is enough data, in my opinion, everywhere that you could pretty much probably answer every single business question using the human element and empirical evidence when you combine those in. But you have to start with those right questions, like you said. But that's a part of data literacy is most people in an organization don't know how to ask those questions. Tell me about your customers. Tell me what they're doing. Why are they doing that? The moment you ask someone, why do you think your customers are doing that? You have sparked a data-informed decision process to happen. And that's the underlying premise of everything in analytics and data is to make better data-informed decisions. But if you don't know how to ask the questions of the CEOs or the executive level, and you just go in with a software, it's going to fail. So that's kind of that first approach. The second approach kind of leads into that is there are 4 levels of analytics in the world that kind of go in this shift. The first one is descriptive analytics. And descriptive analytics is just another way of saying reporting. And this is where I would say 90 to 95% of every organization I've ever found, except for maybe some big ones or exclusive ones like an Amazon. But most organizations spend 90 to 95% of their time in descriptive analytics, where all they're doing is building dashboards and reports. They're not getting past the report side of it. The second phase of analytics is diagnostic analytics, and that's that next phase. That's the why behind it. Organizations are horrible at this, and they just are. And so to your point, the next level is predictive, and the final level is prescriptive. So as you go through that path of analytics, what we hear most about in the media is predictive analytics. And no one is even prepared to do the second level, which is diagnostic analytics, because they're all stuck at the first level. And so this is the recurring theme that you see with organizations as they take on these analytical projects, like going to an executive and asking for something. All of that should lead to data-informed decision-making. And the only way you're going to do that is with data literacy. You're never going to progress through those 4 levels of analytics without data literacy. I've seen it time and time again. In fact, I was on a call, I think it was just yesterday, where the organization said, you can train me all you want on how to use your BI tool, but if my people won't adopt it, it's because they don't have data literacy. So Jordan, talk to me about data literacy. And the way I go about it is you need to marry in an investment in a software with the empowerment of the employees. And when you do that, your analytical strategies will succeed. So you're saying it exactly right. Asking the right questions starts the true analytical journey. I think historically, a lot of people probably started with software and then let that feed the journey, which it shouldn't. It should start with questions and raw data. And then you combine that and say, we need the human element, we need the technology, how do we build our strategy? And that's how it's going to work. But so many people get caught in that journey of those 4 levels, and they have no idea what they're doing. And so it becomes this reoccurring investment and a very poor investment over and over. The ROI is horrible. And so we don't see the returns that we want.
Yeah. And one thing that you said really stuck out to me, which is the human element. And it feels like the more we go into like digital and automation and this whole world, actually, the closer we get to being more human. Because 50 years ago, the boss would just say, well, just do that with no regard for anybody else. But now it's like we're so in digital and automation, we have to consider humans. Because like with automation, we have to make it human or else it's never going to work. And so we really have to understand people and what motivates them and what drives them. You know, that's what I'm seeing a lot, especially with machine learning, is people are like, oh, cool, now we can like automate this and it's going to be this, it's going to tell us this, it's going to tell us that. And we were just upstairs with one of our clients, and machine learning gives them some really cool insights, but not the answers.
And they have no clue. Exactly.
Yeah.
And everybody is investing in those things, trying to make that the answer. But you put that in front of a group of 10 people, and I'm going to bet that 9, you can't really cut a person in half, but 9.5 of those people have no clue what to do with the data that was just put in front of them. The machine spits out all this information, and they're like, okay, we got to make a smart decision. They're going to stare at it and be like, I have no idea how to translate this into a decision. It just doesn't work. I like what you said. It's kind of this roundabout way that we're bringing the human element back into everything.
So it's funny, and like in this situation specifically, the last 2 meetings that we've had with them, we've gone back and forth on like, well, do we do this? Like, do we change the email? Like, and at one point I was like, guys, just like time out here, just do this. And they're like, okay, cool. It's always like you just have to make a decision. Like someone just needs to be like, we're going to try this for the next 2 weeks with 10% of our customers and just see what happens. It could totally fail, and that's fine. We'll try something again the next week.
Yeah, well, you're saying it best. I think also that people think that technology and analytics, I mean, historically data and analytics and math, computer science, they're intimidating subjects for people. So I think that they think the answer has to be complicated. No, data literacy means what you just said. Test it, try it, gather more information, and you might find it failed completely. That's not a bad thing. You're learning from it. But so many people are afraid to even jump at it like that. It's like, why? Just test it. Just go and see what happens. And that's how organizations make it work.
I was reading a couple of your vlogs earlier today. One of the questions I had was, let's say I am a manager. I want to go and I want to get my C-level like really bought in on next level stuff. What do you recommend that person does?
Yeah, so for me, I come at it because I work with a lot of higher ups and executives in my role. And thankfully, data literacy is dotting the world, and they either, one, have heard of it, two, understand why they need to get better at data, et cetera. My approach remains the same, and that is I start with kind of a 3-pronged approach. I don't even talk about the what and the how in the beginning. So when you're trying to drive a data and analytical strategy, don't talk about what you want to do and don't talk about how you're going to do it. Talk about the why. And I think people, when I talk about it this way, it resonates with them better. I talk about why we need to use data, and I go into certain topics. You look at those 4 levels of analytics. So when if I'm speaking, whether it's at an organization or at a conference, wherever I am, the very first thing I talk about a lot of times is the analytical world that we live in. And this gets to the very foundational why we need to use this. 1, the analytical world, we have the 4 levels. Everybody's at level 1 pretty much. 2, we're producing data all over the place. And because we're producing data, organizations that capitalize on it are going to be more successful. 3, one of the things that I do from a data and analytical perspective is we conducted these massive surveys to understand kind of the state of data literacy in the world. But we wanted to understand the state of data literacy in the world to give them that why. The state of data literacy is that only about 1 out of 5 people are comfortable with their data literacy skills. So that means 80% of an organization is not comfortable. This ran the gamut of industries and countries. Everywhere we did this, it didn't matter the industry you were in or the country you lived in, there was a massive skills gap. It was very clear in the surveys and the results. And we had over 11,000 people respond to the survey. So this is a massive undertaking that was taken on. Business decision makers. So those who are going to be making decisions in a business, we're at 24%, or 1 out of 4. The C-level suite was 32%. I tend to think that number is actually a little bit higher than it should have been. I think they were a little more confident in their ability to make decisions than they should have been, with data, being data literate, I should say. And so I utilize those numbers to say, well, and I'm not a big stat guy when I talk about this, because people remember stories more than they remember stats. But I do illuminate those into the story, saying, look, there is a massive skills gap. And I talk about why that skills gap exists. So the final thing I talk about is what is an organization going to get out of this? So we also conducted a big, large statistical analysis on data literacy to understand, is there truly value for an organization? And through that, we actually found we had 600 plus large public companies around the world take part in this analysis that we did. We found that those that were top tier data literate, they achieved 3 to 5% greater enterprise value, which 3 to 5% is out of context. It doesn't mean anything. That could be $5 in some cases. In the organizations that we looked at, it was hundreds of millions of dollars, around, I believe, 324 million to 560 million, I believe, in that range. So the organizations that were top tier data literate had over hundreds of millions of dollars in value. Notice throughout this whole conversation I'm having right now, I haven't even told you what or how you're going to become data literate. I'm still getting at, especially when we look at the executives, I'm still getting at why this matters. And so on top of it, I think besides the value that an executive always loves to see, the monetary value, those that are data literate are also quicker to market. They have better return on equity and better return on sales metrics. So I give them the foundation that, one, we live in a digital world. Two, because of that digital world and because people are not past the first level of analytics, we have this massive skills gap. And three, those organizations that have been able to attack that skills gap appropriately are worth hundreds of millions of dollars more than you are. They're quicker to market. And the world is going to continue down this path of digitization. That's not slowing down. The world is going to continue down this path of technology running a lot of things. The human element needs to be involved. If an organization wants to stay a part of it, they have to get them on board with data and analytical journeys and strategies. Then that usually sets the tone. Great. Then everybody usually is like, yep, we agree. How do we do this? That's when I jump into the how and the what. How are we going to do this and what does that entail? Let's put an initiative in place, be in a paradigm shift initiative, and then we march on from there.
So really, once you've established the why, it's kind of game over.
Falls in place.
Or actually, the game just started, rather.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. And I'll knock on wood, it hasn't happened yet, but I still haven't had an organization say to me, we don't agree with you, we don't want to do this. Every single one from around the world, and I spend a lot of my time now was working with organizations, every single one has jumped on board and said, yep, we agree. This is what we need. And then they ask me, how do you do it? And that's where I've developed the education curriculum and the program that we have.
In my own experience, thinking about the companies that are doing really well are the companies that are investing in advanced analytics, whether it's machine learning and Big Squid or any other tool. If they're that forward thinking, they're probably really forward thinking in other areas of their business as well.
No, I mean, and we could think of the companies that they're the ones that are born and bred in the digital era. Amazon, Google, Facebook, Netflix. These are organizations, if you study their strategies and methodologies, they use data and analytics everywhere. Netflix is one of my favorites to study. They are brilliant when it comes. They will pick actors based off of like statistical probabilities that actor is going to drive more viewership than this actor, right? They're using, it's like when Moneyball became a thing in baseball. I'm a dog-eared baseball guy. I love Moneyball, but you had the old-time scouts who did not want to see this happen. But then when you start to use analytics, it starts to work. So these digital companies, and there are some very old companies that are starting to do better, but these digital companies are killing it right now because you're right. They're forward thinking. They're doing these things already. It's not like this is brand new news to them. They're doing it.
It kind of bothers me that Netflix and Amazon and Google and Facebook always get brought up in this conversation. And not because they don't deserve it, but because I think it discourages smaller companies from doing advanced analytics. You know, the 100-person companies, like they associate machine learning with Facebook, and they're like, I'm not Facebook. And I honestly think that they're like, they kind of throw their hands up like, we're not ready for it. But it's like a role model thing. There's no good role models. I shouldn't say there's none, but unless you're in like the fintech space, but for a lot of industries, there's no good role models of a 200-person company crushing it with machine learning. Not that you hear about, at least. I wish people would stop using those companies as an example, because I don't think it does data literacy and advanced analysts, or just analysts in general. I don't think it does it. It does it a disservice, in my opinion.
No, I agree. I wish I had examples of smaller companies. You know, most of the time I'm brought in on big companies. One example I love to use that it is a big company, but it's one that shows that it doesn't matter how far backwards you are, you could come to the forefront. That's Walmart. Walmart for a very long time was getting crushed by Amazon, but they have started to adopt data and analytical strategies better. I'm sure they've always had them, but they've just started to do it better, which has brought them back from basically what I would say going too far backwards to where now they compete pretty strongly with Amazon. But I agree with you. I would love to have in my back pocket these small companies, and I don't ever want to see them discouraged, because in my opinion, and we talked about this in the beginning, if they're not using it in 5 to 10 years, because they're a smaller company, in my opinion, they're going to get crushed even faster. And that's because they're not embracing what needs to be done to make it happen. And so hopefully they don't get discouraged, but see it as encouragement, because the reality is that's just the future that we live in, is data and analytically driven.
What are the signs that you're actually improving in your data literacy?
Yeah, for me, this is a very interesting question. I see companies, they always want a KPI for data literacy, but the reality is, no offense to most companies, the way they build KPIs is in a very poor manner a lot of times, because they don't let their data determine what a KPI should be. They determine what the KPI should be and then hope the data will catch up to them. And so for me, a lot of things that make data literacy turn and happen, a lot come from tangible things like app usage. So let's say you're using a product like Click, one of our competitors. What does true app usage look like? How many new apps are being produced on a regular basis? How many of those apps are producing visualization and charts that sit in a meeting? And how many people beyond using that visualization can tell me why that visualization looks the way it does? So to me, if the more that an organization is getting to a why behind it, that to me right there is key above anything, probably with measuring data literacy. If you go to a meeting and all people are doing is pressing the button to run their standard dashboard, and then the person gets up and says, this is what my dashboard looks like, here are the observations from it, and you don't talk about why, your data literacy is not improving at all. In fact, my CTO here at Click, his name's Mike Potter, taught me a very valuable lesson on how you should be looking at data literacy and the growth that it's having. When he started as CTO, he told all of his employees, I don't want you to ever bring me a report to my meetings where I can run the dashboard myself. And so what he said is, I don't want you to be accountable for a report. I want accountability towards your data. And what that meant was, I can run that report myself, and I promise you, I will run it before you come to my meeting. I want you to be able to explain everything in it. That's data literacy. So it's that getting to the why in meetings. It's the usage of apps. And so you can track app usage, right? I mean, you can track how many people are using it, how often they're using it, and then conduct your own internal surveys. How many apps are being created? Now, this one's an interesting one, because the creation of a data application, in whatever form that may be, does not denote that you are data literate. What that means is you know how to use an app or create an app. What needs to happen is, with those that are evangelists or those that are smart data scientists or whomever it is in your organization asks for an app or sees that a new app is created, they're the ones who can determine if it has value, right? Because anybody could go create a new application, but didn't actually provide value to the company. I know, like, for example, I got into a project here at Click months ago. There were like 200 or 400 apps that had been produced. I'm willing to bet that only about 10 of them had value, or 10 of them were actually being used for true data-informed decision-making. So this is a whole part of it. But the key ones are, to me, are that app usage and the creation of apps, because it at least shows that the human element is involved. The human element is involved with the data, and then you can measure how many times you're getting to the why behind a meeting itself. Mm-hmm. So that to me is, and I guess the final one, I always come back to the data-informed decision-making. If you yourself or you manage a team or your employees are doing it, what that means is they are actually using information, empirical evidence to drive a decision. That right there will show you that data literacy has happened. And to your point, though, that decision might fail. And if everybody's good with it failing in 2 weeks, that's data literacy, because failure is not a bad thing. Failure is good. It's teaching you how not to do something, and you're still learning from it.
Yeah. And with the whole thing about apps being created, in a way, if I was a CEO and I saw that, I would at the very least, assume that people are curious and they see something and then they're trying to create a new visualization and then they're trying to look at it a different way and they're trying to look at it a different way. It might not all have value, but at least there's some effort going into it at least.
Yeah, they're trying. Absolutely. And that's the key is I get frustrated when someone says, I've got my report. I don't care about your report. I can print the report. Don't tell me about a report. What did you do? What is the data showing you? And if all you're saying are the exact same things I can regurgitate right off the report myself, that's not data literacy. And this is where a lot of companies reside. This is descriptive analytics. They're not doing the diagnostic analytics. They're not getting to the why. And that right there to me is the golden key pretty much of all data literacy. If you can get to that why, then that's what matters.
100% agree. Well, Jordan, I really appreciate you being on the podcast today, and we'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.